In this lesson, I'll show you how to TIG weld outside corner and inside corner joints. We'll use the plates from lesson 1 and 2, but any metal will do, to do a simple build that creates a ton of weld joints for you to practice with very little prep time. I'll compare things like lay wire versus dabbing, go over how to do cover passes, and at the end, troubleshoot some beginner TIG welds. In lesson 1, we trained our eyes to see the puddle and hand to work the torch. In lesson 2, we learned how to dab and weave and went through some key variables. Now we'll put it all together after covering a few other key basics and do some real TIG welds. There are 4 ways to mark metal. The first is your scribe. The lines made with a scribe actually glow and stand out while welding, so they can work as guides, but it's not a very good layout tool. The second is soapstone. I usually only use soapstone for oxy fuel cutting. It's not very accurate and the lines are easy to wipe off. The third is your Sharpie. This is great for stainless steel, prepped metal. It's great for layout and the lines don't contaminate TIG welds. My favorite layout tool for dirty metal is Silver Streak. It works like a mechanical pencil. The wax lines stay on really well. You can even sharpen the tip of that, and it basically does everything that soapstone does, but better. The main difference between a chop saw and an angle grinder with a skinny wheel is the size of the kerf, the width of the actual cut made, with a skinny wheel being much narrower. The trick to a skinny wheel is to be gentle. Sink the blade in, don't push, and let the spinning of the wheel do the cutting for you. After you get your first cuts, inspect them. You'll notice some burrs. This is usually the first thing in all metalwork you want to get rid of. When you go to prep, I'm not a big fan of hard stones. I recommend going right to flapper wheels. They're more versatile, and once you get good with them with a little practice, you can get really good results across the board, and they're really consistent. And they're actually fun to use. So we're going to prep up the edges of our plates, get rid of all the mill scale on the surface and around the corners. Any little nubs from your cuts, this is a good opportunity to smooth those out too. This will make TIG welding your joints much easier. Now that we have our 4 pieces cut and prepped, we're going to fit them and tack them into an inside corner and outside corner joint. To do this, I use a simple jig. It's an angle iron with a foot on the bottom. This is worth having and we'll use it in future lessons. Line your plates up so the edges are in the same plane and everything's aligned. Light your puddle up on one corner, dab your rod, pull the puddle to the other corner, and dab your rod again to get your first tack. One more tack to go, and we're going to get ready to weld our first outside corner. The first pass in a weld joint is called a root. If there's a gap, then it's called an open root. Here we're going to do the lay wire method on our root, where we press the filler rod down against the metal and run it over with our puddle. I'm lighting up right on the edge of the weld joint and forming a puddle. And then I'm introducing my filler rod into that puddle and just pulling the puddle along and consuming the filler rod as I go. I'm at 120 amps using a 1/16 inch filler metal. I'm watching the edges of the puddle and trying to keep it consistent along each edge. If you're having trouble and the rod's melting back, you can upsize to a 3/32 rod here or lower your amps down to 100. It's pretty tricky not to melt your rod back with a little 1/16 rod. But if you can, then you know you're really dialed in. The second root method is the dab method, where you lift the filler rod straight up and straight down into the leading edge of the puddle. With each dab in the puddle, pause for a brief second, and then move the torch forward between each dab. The weld on top of a root is called a cover pass. The goal is to cover the root and fuse into it and tie it into each bevel edge. You want to start your puddle on the very edge of your plate and get it fused into your rod. You'll notice it's more of a lay wire technique, more of a weave if you remember back to lesson 2. Here I'm at 120 amps with a 332 rod. I have a pretty big puddle, so it's more of a wiggle back and forth, and I'm just barely moving that puddle over the sides of the root and fusing it onto the bevel edges. If you go too far up the side and eat those corners, you're not only removing some guidelines for future passes, but you're creating a concave weld, which is no good. At the end of your weld, gently lay off your pedal and pull the pedal backwards into a small little point so you don't create a crater crack. I lowered my amps down to 100 here to show how amperage can affect your puddle shape and movements. You notice it's more of a weave now, where I'm moving that puddle farther back and forth, but it's a smaller puddle. But everything else stays the same. I'm just barely moving that puddle over the edge of the root Here's a really good shot of it just barely fusing onto that bevel edge as I move my way forward. This is again 332 rod, but now I'm at 100 amps. And again at the end, you're just gently letting off the pedal, pulling that puddle back, letting it shrink down. Now that we've done 2 outside corners in the flat position, we're going to do 2 inside corners in the horizontal position. You want to find a position where you can slide your hand comfortably along the plate. The trick to inside corners is to get your tungsten down deep into that corner groove. There are 2 ways to do this. You can do a small cup with a tiny stick out that you can sort of cram down in there, or like me, you can get a big cup with a long stick out that makes it really easy to reach down in. Don't overthink the gravity factor. Just keep it at about 45 degrees, maybe slightly up, and you'll be fine. Now it's time to tack together our box. And you know, the box isn't a crazy build, but I found it really useful as a cup holder on the fab table. There's nothing worse than spilling a drink on your metal table or your project, and it's worked great. One of the advantages here of this build is to be able to practice some real-world scenarios, because most of the stuff you're going to build is going to at least have 1 or 2 tricky welds. So when you're doing a vertical inside corner, make sure your rod's trimmed down short so you don't poke yourself in the face. It's the same as the horizontal. Prop yourself on the edge of the box there and twist your wrist and hand up gently. Look straight down on the weld as you're moving up. Now these are pretty tricky and it might take some time to be able to see what you're doing. My brother is learning to TIG weld, so it was a good opportunity to catch some real footage of a beginner learning and practicing TIG welding. So I'm going to piece it apart and point out a few key things that might be common with what you find yourself doing. As he's moving the puddle forward, he's kind of jumping a little ahead, a little too far ahead, and it's leaving those little gaps on the edge. He's at 120 amps with a 332 rod doing a cover pass. These are called skip tracks. They go by a different name, but I'll just call them skip tracks. And on the far edge, he's getting some undercut. And that's just because he's a little too long on his arc length. The fix here is actually pretty straightforward. We're going to lower him down to 100 amps and have him do it again. Obviously, getting your tungsten stuck is pretty common when you're learning. You actually want to undo the back cap and just pull your torch up and leave your tungsten in there, and then pull your tungsten off separate. So here he is at 100 amps, and you're immediately going to notice on the bottom edge that the skip tracks are gone. Completely solved because he was able to take more time weaving that puddle back and forth, but he's getting undercut. And that, if you look on the bottom right, is because his torch angle is a little off. It's always the arc that creates undercut, not the puddle. Next lesson, we'll cover open roots and how to weld those gaps. Thanks for watching.